All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I think every coder has probably experienced at some point,
Yeah.
especially as a beginner,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
and that's tutorial hell.
Tutorial hell.
It's kind of this idea that you get stuck in this loop of just watching tutorials and following tutorials,
Right.
but you never really get to the point of actually building anything on your own.
Uh-huh.
And so what we want to do today is kind of get to the bottom of, is tutorial hell a real thing?
Right.
Is it really that bad?
Yeah.
And if so, how do you avoid it? And how do you actually break out of that cycle and start building your own things?
I think a good place to start might be, are tutorials actually bad?
Yeah.
Right? Like, there's this kind of inherent, I think, feeling that maybe tutorials are bad if you're in tutorial hell.
Right.
But the truth is they're actually really good for certain things.
Okay.
Like learning syntax and basic concepts.
So they do serve a purpose.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like if you're trying to learn, let's say, JavaScript,
Yep.
you need to know how to actually write JavaScript. You need to know, how to write a function.
Yeah.
You need to know the syntax and the specific keywords and all of that.
And the grammar of the language.
Exactly, the grammar of the language.
Right.
And tutorials are fantastic for that.
Okay.
But I think where they fall short is that they don't really give you a lot of room to problem solve.
Okay. So it's not like they're giving you bad information.
No.
It's just that maybe it's more about how you're using them or how you're approaching them
Right.
that maybe leads you into this tutorial hell.
Exactly. So it's like the trap springs shut when you just use those and you never try to go on your own and build something without those. Because the real learning comes when you have to think for yourself.
I see what you're saying. So it's kind of like you can learn to bake a cake by just following a recipe,
Yeah.
but you're not really a baker until you can come up with your own, crazy concoction.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know one of the sources that we had was talking about how people who jump into building their own projects earlier on actually progress a lot faster
Right.
than people who just stick to tutorials.
Yeah, it was, I think it was like 30% faster.
Wow.
Something like that.
That's huge.
Yeah. And I think part of that is because tutorials are like, these perfect little worlds.
Right.
Right. Everything works. The code's all nice and neat. It's perfectly formatted.
Right. The perfect souffle.
Exactly, yes. But the real world is not like that at all.
Right.
The real world is messy.
Right.
You're going to run into bugs. You're going to have to debug things. You're going to have to try things and fail and then try something else. And that process is what really teaches you.
Yeah. It's that struggle that really makes you a better programmer.
Exactly.
And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, especially coming from the tutorial world,
Yeah.
right? Where everything is so nice and neat.
Right.
And then they go to build their own thing. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is a disaster.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't look anything like the code that I was looking at in the tutorial.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be really discouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that a lot of people experience, right? Is that they start to compare their code to what they see in tutorials and they're like, mine is so messy.
Yeah.
Mine is so bad. I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
But the truth is everyone goes through that. Like every single programmer who's ever been successful has gone through that phase
Yeah.
where their code was messy and they didn't know what they were doing and they felt lost.
Mm-hmm.
So it's totally normal.
So how do you get past that?
I mean, I think a big part of it is just realizing that it's normal.
Right.
And that it's okay for your code to be messy at first. Like it's not going to be perfect. And that's okay.
Right.
Like you're learning, you're experimenting, you're trying things out. And as you get more experience, your code will naturally get better.
Yeah.
But it's not going to happen overnight. So I think just having that kind of grace for yourself
Yeah.
and that understanding that it's a process, it's a journey.
It's not going to be perfect from the start.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you mentioned that sometimes you have to, try things and fail and try again and all that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another thing that tutorials they shield you from that a little bit.
Right.
Because they kind of hold your hand through the whole process.
Right.
And so you don't really get that experience of, okay, well, this didn't work. Now I have to figure out why and fix it.
Yeah.
But that's such an important part of learning to code.
Oh, absolutely. Debugging is, I mean, it's probably like 50% of what I do as a programmer.
Wow.
You know, it's like things are always going to go wrong.
Right.
And you need to be able to figure out why and fix it.
Right. So I guess one way to start to transition out of that tutorial world
Yeah.
into building your own things is to just start to force yourself to solve problems on your own, even if it's small problems.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Just start to get used to that feeling of, okay, well, I don't know how to do this. Let me try to figure it out.
Right. And there's actually a really good technique for that.
Okay.
It's called pseudocoding.
Pseudocode.
Pseudocoding, yeah. And it's basically you just write out what you want your code to do in plain English.
Okay.
So you're not actually writing code yet. You're just like writing out the logic of it.
Okay.
So you're like, okay, first I need to do this, then I need to do this, then I need to check for this.
So it's kind of like outlining an essay before you start writing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like you're just kind of like mapping out the structure of your code before you actually start writing the code.
Right.
And that can really help you to, one, kind of break down the problem into smaller pieces.
Right.
And two, it helps you to kind of think through the logic of it before you get bogged down in the syntax and all of that.
I see. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that's something that a lot of people, myself included, I tend to want to just jump right into the code,
Right.
you know, and then I get halfway through and I'm like, wait a minute,
What am I doing?
what am I doing? This is not going the way that I thought it was going to go.
Exactly.
And I think that's where that pseudocoding can really be helpful.
Yeah.
Is to kind of just take a step back and really think through the logic of it before you start.
Right.
Yeah, and speaking of, you know, getting out of your comfort zone,
Yeah.
have you ever felt stuck in this kind of learning rut,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
maybe even outside of coding?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been playing guitar for like 15 years.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, I can remember when I first started, I was so focused on just learning chords and learning songs.
Yeah.
And I would just like, I had this book of like 1,000 chords.
Right.
And I would just like spend hours just like trying to memorize all these chords. And it wasn't until I actually started trying to write my own songs
Right.
that I actually started to understand music.
Interesting.
Like it was like that process of having to create something new
Yeah.
forced me to actually understand the underlying structure of music.
Wow.
You know, like, okay, well, a chord progression goes like this.
Right.
And you need to have a melody that kind of like fits over top of that.
Right.
And, you know, all of these different things that I didn't understand until I actually had to create something new.
Interesting. So it's like, it's pushing past just that memorization or that imitation
Right.
into actually like understanding the underlying concepts.
Yeah.
And then using those to create something new.
Exactly.
So I guess what we're hearing is tutorials are great for starting out.
Yeah.
They're great for learning the basics. But the real like magic happens when
Right.
you kind of leap off of that launch pad and start to build your own rockets.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's important to remember, too, that you don't have to build a whole spaceship right away.
Right?
Like your first project doesn't have to be this massive, complex application. It can be something small. It can be something simple, just something to kind of get you started
Yeah.
and to kind of get you used to that process of building something from scratch.
So just to kind of wrap things up, tutorials, they're great, but they shouldn't be your dictator.
Right.
You know, they should be your friend, but you don't have to listen to everything they say.
Right.
You know, you can go out there and you can build your own amazing things.
Yeah.
You don't have to stay stuck in that tutorial world.
Right.
And I think that's a really important thing to remember.
Yeah. And I think one last thought to kind of leave you with is think of coding as not just like following instructions, but like creating something that's like meaningful to you.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Something that's unique, something that's your own. Yeah.
And I think that that can really help you to stay motivated and to kind of like push through those difficult times when you're feeling stuck,
Right?
because you're like, no, I'm building something that's important to me,
Yeah. I love that.
you know?
I love that. That's a great way to end it. So I hope you enjoyed this deep dive,
Yeah.
and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.